Welcome everyone to the Beginners NOFO orientation. We're extremely excited to have you here with us today. This is the first time we've put on an event like this to try to ensure that everyone in our community, providers, etc., have an opportunity to learn about this funding opportunity that comes out once a year, and also provide basic information in regards to this process. It's an exciting resource that is utilized throughout our nation in terms of finding and funding projects in each community to help end homelessness. And we're pleased to present this orientation to allow you an opportunity to understand the basics, to ask any questions you want. This is a safe space today, and hopefully will be informative. We're asking everyone to please stay on mute, and you'll notice that this meeting is being recorded so that we can upload it on our website and use it as reference materials in the future. And so our NOFO process this year is a collaborative process. Everyone Home, who is our continuum of care lead, is leading the effort with consultants from home-based consultants. And so I just have on the slide here the list of the different staff members from both of our teams working together on this process. Home-based is going to be facilitating today's presentation, as well as the point of contact for any follow-up questions after today's presentation. This slide is here just to orient you all in terms of the fact that this application process is a non-biased, non-conflicted process. And so there are community members who volunteer their time to review applications that come in for this funding. They're non-conflicted community members that volunteer on our NOFO committee as well as our appeals board. And with that, I will pass over to Esther, who will provide an overview and orient everyone in regards to today's meeting. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let me see. Can everybody see that? Yes, good. Okay, perfect. Good morning, almost afternoon, midday, everyone. My name is Esther Wilch. As Chelsea said, I'm here from home base, and we're excited to have you all here today for the Alameda County COC 2021 NOFO orientation. I think, you know, we've all been on Zoom for the past year and a half, so we know a lot of these, and Chelsea went over some of them, but if you are able and willing to do so, we would love to see your faces. So if you're willing to go off camera, we're going to be working together possibly. So it's just good to get to know each other. We'd love to see your faces. If you have questions or comments, we really, really want to get to them. Today, it's all about you. So please add them to the chat box or raise your hand, and we will call on you or answer them when there's a break. Also, please stay on mute. You know, rather than unmuting and chiming in, it's easier if you're able to raise your hand or put something in the chat box. And if you have any technology challenges during today's meeting, please use the chat feature or email us at alameda@homebaseccc.org for assistance. So yeah. Today's agenda, we're going to do a quick welcome and introductions, and then we're going to do an overview of what the HUD COC NOFO even is, and that's a mouthful. We're going to go over the programs, project types, and eligible costs that are covered by the COC NOFO to see if this is even funding that you are like able to apply for or would actually be interested in applying for. And then we're going to go through some tips and tricks for project design, some updates from the HUD and local competition process. I'm sorry, some updates and the local competition process. Then we're going to visit the priorities, HUD and local Alameda priorities, and finally give you a little bit of information about technical assistance and next steps. So introductions, I am here, I'm Esther Wilch. As I said, I'm a senior staff attorney at home base. Max Disher is another person who's on the Alameda team. He's actually not joining us this morning, but he's there in the middle. You may hear from him, that's his face. And I believe Aram is here if you wanna introduce yourself quickly.
Hi all, I can be on video soon, but Zoom things are coming up. But my name is Aram Houslave. I'm a senior staff attorney with Homebase and here to answer your questions. Ran programs for homeless families in San Francisco for over a decade before joining Homebase a few years ago. And so know a lot of all things NOFA and HUD funding. So happy to help folks think about this funding. Back to you.
Awesome, thanks Aram. So yeah, so that's the primary home base team that will be assisting you in Alameda. So we would love for you to introduce yourselves. If you would please put your name and your organization in the chat box and let us know what is one question you have that you are hoping to get answered today. Why did you come here? What's the burning question? And I'll give folks a minute or two to do that. And while folks are doing that, I guess that Max is actually here. Max, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm so sorry.
No worries. It's been a colorful morning. Hi, everybody. Max Disher here, staff attorney with Homebase, and happy to be here to help assist in clarifying NOFO requirements and local application requirements. I've been helping communities run their local application processes for about 3 years now. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Max. So yeah, we're getting a bunch of good questions here. Jessica from Berkeley Food and Housing Project wants to know if we are eligible, which is always a good question and sort of the foundational thing we hope to answer today. Lori from Fremont is interested in understanding a successful program design. That is something hopefully we'll hit on. And also we encourage you to reach out to us for TA if we don't fully answer that. Jennifer from SAVE wants to know about DV bonus funds. We will hit on that. Emily from the City of Oakland just wants to get familiar as possible with the NOFO process in Alameda County. Welcome. Jordan from Firm Foundation Community Housing is hoping to confirm project eligibility and confirm eSNAP's application deadline. Marilyn from Oakland Elizabeth House. Greater explanation of housing first requirements. We'll touch on that a little bit. And also I would encourage you to reach out to Alameda at homebasecc.org. If we don't cover it completely, we have tons of good information for you, Marilyn. Also hoping to better understand the process, whether it's a good option, general info, what is the process for new projects, what are the requirements for new providers, whether it makes sense to apply. Yeah, awesome. So many good things in here. Really, really appreciate it from all of you. Everett asked, what are the 3 most important things to be aware of during the NOFO process? Interesting, good. Reporting requirements. All right, well, you have all come to the right place because hopefully our plan is to touch on a little bit of all of this. So another quick poll, sorry, you won't have to spend the whole time in the chat, but I just wanted to hear from folks, how many of you currently receive COC program funding and how many of you are considering applying for a new COC funded project this year? So we're really interested in who has done this before and recently, and who is this your first time or your first time in a while. Jennifer's considering new. Awesome. So we have a couple of renewals, but a lot of considering new. Great. Again, you're in the right place. Good job. Thank you so much. All right, moving on to the HUD COC NOFO overview. So it's kind of an alphabet soup. Probably some of you are familiar with what some of these acronyms mean, but just by way of very brief introduction, HUD is the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's the federal government agency that releases money and sets program rules, and it's the agency that oversees this huge grant of money. COC stands for Continuum of Care. It is a little acronym that means many, many different things, especially in the context of the HUD NOFO, the COC NOFO. But essentially, when we talk about the COC, we're talking about a funding stream for permanent housing with services for people experiencing homelessness. And it's also used broadly to describe all stakeholders in the community. If I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so if everybody could just make sure that you're on mute. So sorry. Thank you. Okay, and the NOFO stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. Just this year, they changed it from NOFA to NOFO. It was previously Notice of Funding Availability. It is now an opportunity. If you hear us refer to a NOFA, or you hear somebody refer to a NOFA or Notice of Funding Availability, know that it is the same thing as the NOFO. We've gone through, and I think we've caught anywhere that it's written. So hopefully that won't come up. But if you do hear us say NOFA, just rest assured, it just takes us a long time to adjust to things, but they're the same. It's a change, but they represent the same funding source. So basically, the HUD COC NOFO is the largest single grant of homeless dollars in the United States. Nationally, it funds about $2 billion every year to continuums of care, including Alameda. So the way that it works is that the COC funding is distributed through COC. So as I said, it's a little term that means a lot of different things. Basically, the COC funding is what we call the entire funding grant, and it is distributed to COCs, such as in Alameda, the Alameda Oakland Berkeley COC, which is contiguous with the geographic boundaries of Alameda County. So if you run if you're a provider that is located within Alameda County. And so basically what happens is that HUD has a chunk of money. HUD distributes that money down to COCs, for example, the Alameda COC, San Francisco COC, the Contra Costa COC, and then those COCs take their money and they distribute it to projects that are working within the COC. So project 1, project 2, possibly you, and that's kind of the way that it works. How much money is available? Well, in Alameda, for the Alameda COC, there is a guaranteed $38 million available this year. That's not always the case, but the way that they're doing things this year, the annual renewal demand is guaranteed. That represents the amount of money that you got previously from the NOFO COC funding. And so that is sort of what is promised. Or so the ARD tier 1 is what Alameda is going to get. What is also available is a number of bonus funds for various things. And so that's new money that the COC can get to fund new projects and new things. And so the first of these is the COC bonus that represents tier 2. There's about $1.9 million available there. There's also the domestic violence bonus, which is another $1.9 million that is there to serve people who are working with victims and survivors of domestic violence. And then there's also 1.1 million for COC planning, which is like coordinated entry, HMIS, that kind of thing. But essentially, this tier 2, the COC bonus and the domestic violence bonus, that's new money that you can apply for. If you get it and you get those projects funded, then next year those funds will become part of the annual renewal demand. So that's how you increase the amount of money that the COC gets from the COC NOFO. So that's sort of a very broad introduction. Does anybody have any initial questions out the gate before we get into the specifics of whether or not your specific program might be eligible? All right. If you do, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat. We're monitoring it and we will call on you. So yeah, so the bulk of why you all are here, I think, is to know whether or not this COC NOFO thing is even right for you. So let's go over the program, project types, and eligible costs. Who can apply? People and more people this year can apply. So nonprofit organizations can apply for NOFO funding, states, local governments, instrumentalities of state and local governments, public housing authorities, and tribes and tribal entities. So that last one is new this year. They've never been eligible to apply before. If you are associated with a tribe or tribal entity, or you know somebody who is, Homebase would be very, very, very interested in talking to you. This is a welcome expansion in eligibility. It's important. It's also something that, because it's never been here before, been part of the NOFO funding before, it's not something that Homebase has a terrible amount of experience in. So, but certainly something that we want to get the word out and take advantage of. So to the extent that you all know people or organizations that may fit within that, please spread the word. All right, what project types are eligible? Essentially, when you're talking about COC NOFO dollars, you're basically talking about permanent housing programs. You're talking about housing programs. So the first project type that is eligible is permanent supportive housing. There are no time limits for this under NOFO. It can be project-based or scattered site. And generally, when you are talking about permanent supportive housing, you're talking about really high acuity people. So people who either meet the chronic or dedicated plus definitions of homelessness, people with disabilities. And under permanent supportive housing, all eligible cost categories are covered for the NOFO. So yeah, so when you're talking about permanent supportive housing, you are talking, you know, long-term housing for high acuity folks. NOFO also covers rapid rehousing, which is more time-limited housing for sort of more medium acuity folks. So a way to get people into housing for a more limited amount of time, and then they can, you know, stabilize themselves and move on to more permanent housing. So under NOFO, there is a time limit to these kinds of projects. I think it's up to 24 months for like actual housing assistance. And I think it's slightly different for supportive services, but I actually don't know off the top of my head what the difference is. But generally with these, you're talking about scattered site. In order to qualify, you have to meet the homeless definition category, the HUD homeless definition category 1, 2, or 4. And what's covered under the HUD COC NOFA funding is tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services are covered, HMIS, direct costs, and administrative costs. There's also this funny joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing thing that is also available under HUD funding. If it sounds like this is what your project might fit into, we really encourage you to reach out to us because it is a little more nebulous than just the straight permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. But basically this provides some leasing money, tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, HMIS, indirect and administrative costs to project-based or scattered site programs that are limited up to 24 months and also are serving people who meet that homeless definition. Also, there's, as I said, there's the planning money, and that covers HMIS and coordinated entry supportive services only, but generally those projects are held by the collaborative applicants. So for most of you, what you're going to be looking at is one of these housing projects types. So what is not eligible? Oh,
Hey, Esther.
sorry. Yeah, so sorry. I guess I misspoke.
No worries. Back up one slide. Just to clarify for folks, this is kind of a key one, especially if you're super new. My name's Aaron, Esther at Homebase. This slide really helps tell you a couple things. That the funding is to serve people who are very much homeless and literally homeless. And if you're not familiar with the categories, category 1 is what generally most of these programs are supposed to serve, which is literally homeless. So street shelter, that kind of thing, living in your car. That's predominantly what the funding is for. The rapid rehousing and transitional housing, rapid rehousing grants permit people who are at imminent risk of losing their housing because they can pay to keep people to stay in housing or to like pay for a new subsidy for them. Category 4 is the domestic violence piece. So rather than, so you're going to hear about domestic violence bonus money where you can apply just to serve these folks, but it is also a eligible category within HUD's homeless definitions that you can serve in rapid rehousing or the joint programs. And that's category 4, which is if the folks are fleeing domestic violence, human trafficking, sex trafficking, stalking, they're basically considered homeless because they essentially are, because they're having to face that dangerous situation. PSH is the one that provides the long-term housing, and that is the one that's really focused on a lot of the folks that are going to be coming into the system. So everybody who is seeking this kind of service as a participant or a consumer would have to go through a coordinated entry front door. And then you have to take your clients from that coordinated entry. So like permanent supportive housing is going to take the folks that are found to be most vulnerable, chronically homeless. So many of you, I don't want to take for granted if folks don't know what chronically homeless and dedicated plus mean. If you've been working with HUD money, you might know. If not, it's very specific. And essentially though, people have to have been homeless for a while and have a disability, if I could boil it down. But there are specific time measures for how long. And then there's something called dedicated plus that makes it like a little bit easier to like meet that criteria. But essentially it's disabled folks who you expect to be housing for a long time. And then the rapid rehousing and joint transitional housing programs are usually people that are like lower acuity, scoring lower on when your community uses like a vulnerability index, which is used in coordinated entry. They score lower, they might go into these other programs, and that's why the definition is a bit wider. And then just point of clarity, the COC planning dollars are for the community to plan. They're not part of the competition themselves. HMIS and coordinated entry are things that you're not typically going to be applying for, certainly not HMIS. That's basically the lead entity responsible for doing all the homeless database work and making sure that the system is in place. So that's going to be the county. And then the coordinated entry piece is also generally run by the county, but there are ways to enter into that process more specifically through domestic violence. But essentially coordinated entry is acting as part of the front door, doing the assessments. So again, more than likely you're not applying for those two things, and you're applying for essentially a housing program. If you come here just to get funding for services, I'll just be blunt, this isn't it. You really have to want to be in the housing game. You need to be wanting to permanently house people to do it. You can get supportive services money with it and admin costs and things like that, but essentially you're going to be in the business of housing business, used loosely, but you're going to be housing folks who are literally homeless or fleeing violence or who are disabled into one of these component types, just to be super clear. So sorry, Esther, back to you.
No, really appreciate that. Thanks for clearing it all up at the start. Yeah, so preview, or he previewed this, but what is not eligible under the HUD COC funding? If you provide emergency shelter, generally that is not available. As Aram said, if you are providing support services only without housing, except in this limited coordinated entry caveat, that's not eligible. It's really sort of housing first and then supportive services is what they're looking to fund with this grant. New transitional housing, not eligible unless it is coupled with the rapid rehousing point. And then also homelessness prevention and diversion is not a good fit for HUD COC funding. So if you are running projects that fit under any of this, and you have questions about ways that you might be able to get it funded, you can reach out to Homebase. We are here to help. But generally, these are not categories that are good fit for the HUD COC NOFO funding. Yeah, and so again, Aram went over this, but who can I serve? So the primary target of COC funding is people who are experiencing literal homelessness. So you're talking about people who are currently living in a place that is not fit for human habitation and are doing so for an extended period of time. It's not like a one-off of a night or two. So people who are sleeping on the street, sleeping in a tent, in a park, or in a car, people who are sleeping in an RV or in an abandoned building that is not hooked up to utilities, people sleeping in an emergency shelter that is specifically for people experiencing homelessness. Also, people sleeping in jail or in the emergency room for a couple of nights and then going back to sleeping outside. If you start out as literally homeless and then you're booked into jail and you're there for, I think it's up to 90 days. And then you come out and you're literally homeless again, that break where you were in custody does not mean you are no longer homeless because you were housed for that period. But if you are housed long enough, that can be a break. So yeah, so what it doesn't include people who are couch surfing, even if you do not have your own home. If you have a place that you can stay with other people, that doesn't count. Doubling up, maybe you're living with more people than you would like to, but you still have a place to live that is fit for human habitation, that doesn't count. If you've been staying in a sober living home, that doesn't count. And motels where the client is paying for it themselves, that also doesn't count. So as Aram said, this is really getting at, literally homeless people and within that, pretty high acuity homeless people. Other eligible clients, sometimes depending on program type, you can serve clients who are not literally homeless. So Aram touched on this, people who are actively fleeing domestic violence, or human trafficking, stalking, any of these things, or who need to leave their home in order to escape an abuser and do not have other resources. Individuals and families that fit under that are covered. Also, people who have been evicted by a court of law and have nowhere else to go and no other resources. So even if you don't meet the literal definition now, if by court order you're out of options and you need to leave, you may fit the definition, you may be eligible under the COC funding. There are a few other rare exceptions. If you have questions, reach out to Homebase. If this still does not sound like your target population, then we would encourage you to consider applying for funding from another source. Just because the COC funding is the largest does not mean that it is necessarily the best. Certainly not the only for your specific project. There's a lot of other sources, ESG, CSBG, CDBG, HEAP, SESH, HOME, all federal or state funding programs for low income or homeless housing or services. There's a lot of other options. We are just happen to be talking about this one limited one today. So do not feel dismayed if this does not sound like your project would be eligible. We encourage you to reach out to Homebase if you have questions, or everyone home, see where you might, the county, see where you might be a good fit. Okay, so assuming that you are serving clients who fit that broad eligibility, can you specialize in a subpopulation? Yes, you can. Within the group of people who are literally homeless, you can usually choose a subset that you want to focus on. Within that subset, you need to be aware of anti-discrimination laws. So you can't have housing or rules that exclude individuals with like a particular disability or something like that. You also need to be able and willing to serve the general homeless population. So if you run out of people to serve within your specialized population, you need to be willing to serve the population as a whole. You have to accept referrals through coordinated entry. That's a threshold requirement to receive this funding. Yeah, I would just, if you are interested in working with a subset, I would familiarize yourself with, anti-discrimination laws, Fair Housing Act, just ensure that you are not running astray of that. But some common specialities include youth and transitional age youth, age 24 and under, domestic violence survivors, veterans, people with disabilities. If you are, specifically catering to a subpopulation, that is okay. All right, so assuming that you are able to apply for the money and you get the money, what can you do with it? You can do a lot. You can pay capital costs associated with the property. So, costs associated with acquisition, rehabbing, new construction. You can also pay actual housing costs, so rental assistance, leasing, operations. You can cover supportive services. You can cover HMIS costs. You can cover indirect costs, administrative costs. Yeah, so within the housing costs, how will you pay for housing? We just wanted to go over a couple of common ways to do that using the HUD COC NOFO funding. The first, I keep saying NOFO as though it's it's HUD COC funding, but so the first of these is paying for, the first of these options to pay for housing is using master leasing. With master leasing, you contract and sign a lease on some housing or apartments. These could be different units scattered around the city. They could be one or two large housing complexes, but you sign on as the master leaseholder, and then HUD will reimburse you the cost of the lease. You then sublease free or discounted housing to your clients from that single site or scattered site building. They sign leases with you that last for at least 12 months. And you want those leases to look as normal as possible. So what that means is we've touched on housing first and how programs that receive the COC funding need to be housing first. So part of, this kind of goes in with that, is that you want your lease, you can't have weird covenants in there and weird requirements that you wouldn't see in sort of a standard lease. You want your sublease with your clients to look as much like a, typical lease that you would see in the Bay Area as possible. So it's really just, you are leasing with the owner for these apartments, and then you are leasing them to someone else. It's just sort of like a standard landlord-tenant lease. Each unit of housing has to be a traditional home. So it has to, be habitable and have all of the things that would be in a traditional home. And it's okay to share an apartment with a housemate, but you cannot use the COC funds to run an institution or a group home. So roommates are okay, but beyond that, that's not allowed. Another housing option is tenant-based rental assistance. Under tenant-based rental assistance, rather than you signing the lease for the client, you help your client find available housing units. I'm sorry, I said that weird. Rather than you finding the housing, signing the lease, and then subletting to your client, you help your client find the apartment or housing unit themselves. The client then signs directly with the third-party landlord. They also sign a 12-month lease. This lease should also be normal or typical. And the apartment rent needs to be, or the unit rent needs to be low enough to fit within HUD's guidelines for the area and the amenities of the apartment. There's information about this available on the HUD website. You can also reach out to Homebase if you have questions about what would qualify. But basically, under tenant-based rental assistance, you pay the landlord a monthly, sorry, it's kind of hot in here. You pay the landlord a monthly stipend to help with the client's rent. And if the client has income from a job or mainstream benefits, then they use part of that income to help pay rent, and HUD reimburses you for the cost of the monthly stipend. So similar to leasing, but slightly different. There are a couple of other housing options. If you own housing or you wish to use your COC program funds for that, you can choose to apply for operating and services funds. When you apply for COC funding, there are other types of rental assistance as well, including project-based and sponsor-based that could be a better fit for you. If you have questions about any of these and the pros and cons and what the heck they even mean, we encourage you to reach out to Homebase, and we can help you decide which is best for your program. I'm gonna take a quick sip of water. All right. Other housing costs. Depending on your program structure and its demands, you can also use COC housing funds to pay for a number of other things associated with housing costs, including security deposits and first and last month's rent for your clients. You can pay one-time utility deposits for your clients. You can cover minor property damage up to the value of 1 month of rent. When a client leaves one of the units, you can cover routine property management costs if you own or lease the building yourself. And you can cover up to 1 month of vacancy of a unit when a client leaves early and you have that holdover before they can get someone new in. Normally, you cannot use funds to pay for the mortgage on a property that you already own or major rehabilitation on a damaged property. Okay, we've gotten a number of questions, sort of, or at least one question about staff. So, and whether or not you can use funds to pay for staff, and the answer is yes. And so in more detail, you can use COC funds to pay for staff, including case managers and social workers. Case managers who will help your clients sign up for benefits and settle into their new homes. Social workers who will coach your clients to figure out how they would like to accomplish their goals. You can also pay for licensed therapists and counselors. This includes salary, benefits, staff mileage, payroll taxes. All of that is covered as to case managers and social workers who are working with your COC clients. You can also pay for program managers and administration. You can use COC funds to cover the cost of the person who is hiring, supervising, and or managing the staff who work in the program. You can use funds to pay for the time your staff spend reporting on client outcomes, because there is a fair amount of that needs to be done with the COC funds. And you can use it to pay for a portion of your accounting or audit services. You might need to use admin COC funds if the manager is not directly working with clients, and these are capped at 10% of each new grant. So yeah, if you have questions about that, reach out. And then another thing you can do using COC funds is hiring a specialist. Many programs use third-party help for services beyond case management. You can hire a specialist if you think that you can put them to good use, and this is very flexible. They can be full-time, they can be part-time, they can be on a contract or temporary basis, by the hour, only as needed. And this is a really good way to get some, some specialized knowledge that is important for the people you're serving, but that you don't have the need or the ability to retain full-time on staff to get them in and do some important work. So this includes housing navigators, psychotherapists, literacy teachers, security guards, all kinds of different people that you can help pay for. Okay, so you know, you can pay for the housing, you can pay for the staff. What about paying for services? So there are lots and lots of eligible supportive services under the COC funding. There's medical care, there's child care, transportation, food, job training and education, legal services, and more. But here's the big rub, and we've already touched on this, but the big thing to know is that the supportive services must be necessary to assist the program, that the program participants who are obtaining and maintaining housing. So you cannot use COC funds on any of these services unless you are running a housing program and the people who are benefiting from these supportive services are in that housing program and are receiving COC funds. So yeah, so essentially all the people receiving your services must be receiving a housing subsidy from you. It is not enough to just be trying to help people who are experiencing homelessness. You have to pair that with a housing subsidy. It's not enough to say that someone else is taking care of the housing needs. You have to be arranging for the housing. There are limited exceptions for coordinated entry and for follow-up on clients who you have already housed. Again, if you have questions about the coordinated entry piece, reach out to us. But generally speaking, services, supportive services need to be coupled with housing. Aram.
Hey, Esther. I wanted to pause to address some questions in the chat because I think we're about to move to sort of another section. So I think it makes sense. So I want to just run down because I think they might apply to folks. One was a nonprofit religious affiliation apply. I think it has to be 501(c). So that would be the thing, and you would have to prove that piece. So there may be, but we could speak to you further if it would be helpful, and we'll give our email as well. Another question: would an RH project be required to match from coordinated entry? And reading that as take from coordinated entry. So if you get money from HUD through the COC program, you must take through coordinated entry. You cannot take people from like the shelter you already run, like from any side doors. It has to be through the front. HUD's essentially trying to get folks to come through the front door for housing, at least for the federal dollars. So that's why everyone has to come to the front. But admittedly, as someone who has had to run programs, you could just take who you wanted versus through a system. It can be more challenging because you don't always have say over who's coming in the same way. But you definitely have to take from there, including domestic violence projects also have to take from coordinated entry, but there are considerations for safety, and the front door can like immediately, you know, try and shift people to current DV providers so that there are trained staff kind of dealing with from the beginning. And it's something that the county is currently building out now and may seek to expand kind of that front door, you know, in this year. So it should be more support for that. Can collaborations apply? So if you have an org that does shelter and another provides services, generally, yeah. So somebody's going to be the lead and take the money, and then somebody is going to, unless you have another entity set up between all of you, but somebody would be the lead and be the direct recipient, and then others could be the sub-recipients, and all of your experience together would be part of the application. That's one of the benefits. It's actually a good thing to do is if you know you do housing well, somebody else does service as well, especially if it's a target population, to partner up. This question specifically speaks to shelter. So just as a reminder, this can't fund shelter. This can't fund kind of more of those institutional setups like that or congregate settings like that. It has to be permanent housing, or it has to be that joint transitional that leads to permanent housing. So just to clarify, now if a shelter is like, well, I really want to start housing folks directly from the system, then that's something you could take on as well as like a rapid rehousing project to provide subsidies, but you'd still be taking them through coordinated entry and not necessarily from the beds in your shelter itself. Let's see if I missed anything else. Criminal convictions. Are certain people with certain criminal convictions prohibited from receiving any of this? So it's not like the same as housing authorities where there's a lot of stuff in the way. Generally, to be housing first, you are not using a background check for criminal history as part of your selection criteria in any way. It's been found to basically screen people from coming in, even if folks even say, well, we're not going to use it to deny you, but we're doing it up front. It's something that keeps people from coming in, and housing first is all about getting people inside, essentially to support them, because people can't really do the work while they're still on the outside or living in the street. So basically, no, the rules that govern this money are federal regulation. We call this continuum of care interim rule. It's easily Googleable, it's easily searchable. But basically it says if you're providing services directly for households with children, you may be able to look at sex offender statuses a little more. But I even warn people blanket, like if people have certain statuses to prevent that too, because that's been shown to hurt folks. Literally, people could be on it for peeing near a school. And so there's a lot more there to kind of get into, but essentially, no, people are not being denied for criminal background checks. And more, just so folks know, property managers often use criminal background checks so they can protect their property, but more and more we're seeing that it's not actually predictive. And most of the time we're doing these criminal background checks, making people jump through hoops, and then we let them in anyways. So either letting them in anyways, or it's not actually predicting future behavior. So that's just something to consider here. Are you allowed to design programs specifically for justice involved populations? It's a really good question. It's one that's like, Esther and I are actually like actively working on this like issue as a whole and trying to see really how much you can go up against fair housing laws that were supposed to like prevent discrimination, but ultimately may prevent us from supporting folks we know are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So essentially, there are a couple of things going on. HUD has put out emergency housing vouchers that are supposed to support people re-entering. You are allowed to leverage these new vouchers and ask for services money in a program like this. So if you can get your hands on those vouchers, or you're someone who can get those vouchers working with the continuum in the county in your project, then potentially you could serve this group directly and get them permanently housed. The only thing you have to just be careful of is that anybody who's been in an institution longer than 90 days does not qualify. So that's the real rub here. And what we've been up against is you're no longer considered homeless by HUD's definition if you've been there longer than 90 days. So it still works for people who've just maybe gone to jail, but if people are in prison, it's going to be unlikely. The one workaround is if people are fleeing violence and things like that, or they get out of jail and they're immediately homeless, which is not the way we want to work the system. We want people to go from one to another. But so there are things to like consider here, but I think it's worth like working with, if it's something you're considering, you could work with the county and the coordinated entry to say, like, let's get these folks to come to us first, potentially if they're justice involved. But with all COC programs, if there's no one that fits the criteria and ready to go into your program, you generally have to take whoever is available. So if you're, the exception might be if you are strictly a DV program, you wouldn't have to take non-victims, but essentially that's the answer there. There's a bunch and I want to keep going. I think this is the last one. Could a program have a geographic preference? You could have a geographic preference in so much as that you have to serve people in Alameda County. Beyond that, people are going to be given to you from the Alameda County coordinated entry, so you wouldn't be able to do anything there. I will say this is like another way that I think just kind of as a bigger issue, like locally, we have to figure out how to target certain areas where people aren't getting services. So I think it's worth like building the housing there or continuing to build shelters there, resource centers, but this funding source may not be the answer to like all our kind of criminal justice and like targeting certain geographies within our community. But all really good, thoughtful questions. I probably said more in a beginning thing than I should have, but I can't help myself. So I think that's it for this time.
Thanks, Aram. And keep the questions coming. We really appreciate hearing from all of you. Yeah, so quickly, match requirements. HUD won't pay for the entire cost of your program. You have to be able to match HUD's funding with some funding on your own. The basic match requirement ratio is 4-to-1. So for every $4 you get from HUD, beyond leasing, you need to find and spend $1 from another source. And you have to keep track of your match and show how it was spent on eligible costs for eligible clients. So lots of recording there. You can't use funding for a non-COC program like a soup kitchen to match your housing project unless you track how often your COC clients eat there and document that cost, which then can be a match. So you really need to be able to show that there is this direct nexus between the money and the people that are eligible to be funded by it. You can use staff time and volunteer time related to COC clients as match if the staff person's salary is not being paid for by HUD. So if you have a staff person who is covered by some other grant or money source, that can be a match. So yeah, so some warnings about matching. The other program has to be funding eligible COC costs and COC clients. You can't have a program where 4/5 of the people are covered by COC funding and 1/5 are not chronically homeless, not covered by the COC funding at all, and say that that's the match. They all need to be eligible. Also, the other source cannot be claiming COC funds as a match. So you can't say, our match is ESG funds, and then ESG turns around and says our match is COC funds, and then it's just a snake eating its tail. It's just one way. One of you can claim that match, and that's it. And the funds cannot be statutorily prohibited from being used as a match, for example, home funds. And also just a word of warning, as we said in the previous slide, like in-kind matches are okay. You can pay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a cash match, but there is a very high administrative burden relative to a cash match. You have to be able to show exactly how much money went to the COC eligible clients and match that up with the COC funding. So just really be prepared for a lot of administrative work, a memorandum of understanding. If you're working with another organization, staff and volunteer time tracking, that is really, really, really detailed, and providing basis for value of goods and services, all of that. It can be done. You just want to make sure that from the outset, you're keeping really good records. So examples of match sources: federal, you have SAMHSA, Medi-Cal, Medicaid, CDBG, CSBG, ESG funds. California, CalWORks, SESH, HEAP, and HAP. Local, there's funds from the county. There may be funds from your city, foundations that you work with, nonprofits, faith-based organizations and churches, private donations, program income. Any of these can form the basis for that match. So, it's not super limited, but it's something to be aware of. And then other requirements for receiving the COC funding: coordinated entry. Aaron and I have talked about that a lot. Housing first, we've talked about that a lot. If you still have questions, please reach out to Homebase about that. We have a lot of resources. It's something we feel very passionately about. So we are happy to, help you to understand exactly what's required there. As I said, record keeping regarding eligibility determinations, your policies and procedures, housing quality standards, environmental reviews, certain data quality standard requirements, and use of the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. So those are all of the requirements if you are going to be receiving the COC funds. Does anybody have any burning questions before we move on to actual project design? Okay. All right. So assuming you sat through all of that and you think, yes, I'm eligible, and yes, this is funding that I want to apply for, how do you design the project? How do you get the funding? So, these are sort of our out the gate questions that we encourage people to really think on and have good answers to. How will you serve, or sorry, who will you serve? Who is your primary focus population? What do they need? Who are they? Are they being served already? Is there a hole? Is there a need that you're filling? How long will an average client stay in your program? So that helps you to figure out exactly, once you know who your client is, you know how long you're going to need to serve them, what kinds of services they'll need, what kind of housing program is appropriate, all of that. Where will your clients live? What kind of housing are you offering them geographically? Where are they going to be? Alameda is not a small county. There's lots and lots of options. Where are they going to be lived? Where are they going to live geographically, and what kind of housing will they be in within the county? How much behavioral support will your clients need? Depending on who your focus is, there's going to be different behavioral support needs, both in amount and type. So, make sure you've really nailed that down. And what you really want to be looking at is looking across the county and even, the Bay Area, but like what is the need? Where is there a need? And what seems hard to others but is easy to you? What niche could you fill that would help people experiencing homelessness in Alameda County? You also want to ask yourself project size questions. So, these are less sort of interesting, but they're really important. How much match can you contribute? What could you actually meet? What amount? How much staffing can you do on this project? What's really available to you that way? How much experience do you have working with federal grants? For a first time, it's onerous. There's a lot of reporting requirements and that kind of thing. Just be aware of that. How do you usually keep track of your time and expenses? Do you have the administrative tools and all of that to cover this? And so, this is not the fun part, as I said, but this is where Homebase is here to help you in a big way. I think we've put it in the chat a few times. We will continue to do so, but you feel free to reach out with any questions that you have to alameda@homebaseccc.org. Aram just put it in the chat. And also feel free, to just ask us a question there or to request a TA session with us. We are more than happy to help talk through project design questions with you. All right, so next section, NOFO updates and local competition process. So the local competition timeline in Alameda. The NOFO was released on August 18th, which is much later than it normally is. And on September 13th, a week ago, the Alameda competition began. We held a bidders conference. If you were not there, there's a recording of it. There's a lot of materials. I encourage you to reach out to us. I will send you all of that. There's lots of good stuff there that gets into a little more detail about the actual process and things than we are going to do today. From a week ago today through a week from today is an FAQ period. Everyone Home we are with Everyone Home. We are collecting frequently asked questions. They're on a rolling basis, updating those. Reach out to Homebase with your questions. And then the local competition is going to end on October 8th. So applications are due to Homebase on October 8th by 5 p.m. After that, there's going to be a review and rank period. The Alameda review and rank panel is going to go through, look at all of the different applications, rank them. There's then an appeals period. And on October 29th, the final rating and ranking list will be released. Per the rules, we then have to post Alameda's NOFO consolidated application materials on the Everyone Home website, and then we will officially submit it on November 12th so that we're not right up against the deadline of November 16th. So that's just a broad strokes overview of this whole thing. But for your purposes, basically, it's a two-step approval process. The first of these is the local competition. That's what we're in right now. As part of the local competition, every COC creates a process to decide which projects to forward onto HUD and what priority to give them through the local competition. So you all will apply to this. They will then get them, look at everything and rank all of the projects based on local priorities and HUD priorities and how they stack up using the scoring tools. As we said at the beginning, all the tier 1 projects this year are automatically funded. So what we're really talking about here is that bonus funding in tier 2, just sort of figuring out how those are ranked. So yeah, so each project completes an application that is reviewed and ranked by a non-conflicted panel, which Chelsea talked about at the beginning, using these scoring tools, which have been carefully vetted and approved by the community at large and also the NOFO committee. And then once Alameda has their whole list with all of the projects ranked on this priority listing, we submit all of that to HUD, and then HUD decides whether the application is eligible and also whether there is enough money available to fund all of the projects on the list. Hint, there usually isn't. So then what it really comes down to is how good the COC project is as a whole, how much funding we get, and then from there, who gets funded based on how they are prioritized. Does that make some amount of sense? Does anybody have any questions? So basically there's the 2-step approval process. So it's also a 2-step application process. Step 1, where we're at now, is the local application. What you're going to need for that is a DUNS number, proof of nonprofit status. You're going to answer some essays and short answers, and you're going to answer some details on what kind of funding you want and how you plan to spend it. So all those things that we went over with project design, you're going to answer those. The second step is the national application, which is on eSnaps, involves the applicant profile, essays, and short answers, and the TA process for new projects to ensure compliance with HUD rules. We will link to the TA handbook that Homebase puts out, which deals with a lot of this at the end. And also another plug, reach out to us, Alameda@homebasecccc.org, and we can help you with some of these little procedural questions. So, Aaron.
Yeah, just so to clarify, because there's like a couple parallel things going on, just make sure people feel like it, because I'm seeing questions in the chat about what's due on the 8th. So for one, if this is the first time you're hearing all of this, the October 8th might feel soon. We kicked this off a week ago, but realizing that some folks might want a deeper dive, we decided let's get in front of folks. So either really help you to get your app in this year, or well place you to look at this in the coming year with your agency, because it can be a lot to consider if you haven't thought about federal funding before. But that being said, the 8th is a key deadline for a couple things. So Homebase is supporting largely what we're calling kind of the local competition. So we have Katie put in what we have from bidders conference. So bidders is like where all the materials you need to apply for something are available. So there's an online folder where you can get like recording of that whole conversation, everything you need to know to apply locally. Homebase is working with EveryOne Home for the first time. So in past years, you had to fill out a bunch of forms, and this year it's moved to like a web-based portal, kind of like, you know, really a question answer, more survey monkey type thing, especially for new projects. Projects who've been here in the past also get ranked on objective data. So all of that kind of goes together to put you in front of the NOFO committee to get ranked, because you have to give HUD a list of the projects you want to fund in the order you want them funded. So that extra money, that bonus money Esther talked about earlier, a lot of times that's where this comes into play, is where you rank amongst the other people who apply. Simultaneously, you always have to apply to HUD in an eSnaps portal for the money, for whoever is like the direct person. If you're working in a partnership, it's just the direct person who is initially getting in the funding, known as a direct recipient. The handbook Esther just referenced has a ton of information about how to navigate all of that, and we'll provide that in a second. But if you're a renewal project, you've done this before in eSnaps, it's generally pretty easy. You just have to update a few things and submit. If you're a new project, you'll be asked about your budget, things we're talking about today, your budget, the description of your project, those types of things. So new projects do have to do a bunch in the beginning, is apply in this local process, and then additionally apply to HUD directly. The local part is because we need to have a ranked list, and the part by HUD directly is that Alameda as a community needs to have all of its folks apply on their own in eSnaps before they can submit for the entire community. So that's onto a slide. The slide that's being shown now is about the local competition. So that's the part where like it's gonna, how you're gonna get ranked up against other folks who are also applying. So I can pass it back to you, Esther, if you want to do that part. But I just wanted to explain those kind of different tracks that are going on the same time, and all of that needs to be in by the 8th.
Thanks a lot. I was not looking at the chat at all, so I appreciate you covering on that one. Yeah, so on the screen now, how will my project be scored? This is based on the local scoring tools that Alameda has designed and that have gone through the community comment period and all of that. They have been informed by HUD's priorities this year a bit, which we will get into. But generally, you will be scored 5 points based on the project primary activity type. So what kind of project it is and where it fits in with the priorities that way. The degree to which it addresses local and HUD priorities, outcome performance, grant management, and cost effectiveness and organizational capacity. And so it's out of 100 points. You know, you can see there how it's all divided up. So yeah, you'll submit your local application, and then using these scoring factors, the non-conflicted review and rank panel will go through and they will score every single project, and then they will make a list from 1 through 9 million, however many projects apply. Yeah, not 9 million, please. But so 2021 NOFO priorities. Just a little, broad view. We're back at it again. Housing first. It's important. It's a threshold requirement to even apply for the COC funding, and it's also been brought back this year and sort of highlighted by the new administration. So, just remember, low barrier, rapid placement and stabilization in permanent housing with individualized supportive services. The idea is get people housed first without caveats, and then get them the supportive services that they need to get stabilized from there. If you have questions, reach out to home base. Another HUD priority that is being highlighted this year is partnering with health. This is especially for permanent housing, and especially for substance use recovery and mental health services. If you have a program where you are doing something especially cool and great with substance use recovery, mental health services, health in general, we would love to hear from you. It's something that has been highlighted this year by HUD as a big priority for them. These last two are priorities that HUD has identified, and also things that the Alameda COC, I think, has been doing just very, very well. So HUD has identified the importance of racial equity. So identifying and removing barriers, focusing on overrepresented race and ethnicities within Alameda County. EveryOne Home has this amazing report centering racial equity and homeless system design that they did in the last year or two, I think. And really, really encourage you all to look at that, check that out. It informs a lot of, there's information there that ties into a lot of what HUD is looking for. But, this is a great opportunity to really highlight the amazing work that Alameda is already doing in ways that HUD has said that they are interested in hearing about. So if you have a project that is looking specifically at, that's doing interesting things with racial equity, consider that. Also incorporating folks with lived experience through outreach, decision-making, project design, implementation, another thing that Alameda's been doing really well. And if you have a project design that does something especially interesting there, reach out to us, let us know because that is another priority that HUD has highlighted. Okay, so as we said, there's this TA handbook. It's online as a searchable PDF, and you can get it by going to the website that Aram has just put in the chat and putting in NOFA TA 2021 as the password. It answers a ton of the questions that we don't spend a bunch of time on during these meetings because they're so technical. But also, if you come across an issue that is not answered there, we always say first go to the TA handbook, see if you can find the question answered. If you can't, please email home base and let us know. But there's a ton of good information in there about eSNAPs and how to apply and all of that. So some other highlights from the TA handbook: match, especially cash match, what costs are eligible, and then just a whole bunch of information about eSNAPs, which I think is no one's favorite, maybe. So just be aware that it is not always the easiest to navigate. So make sure that you have the TA handbook there to assist you and answer questions. And we are at the end of what I had planned for today. Gotten a ton of information. I encourage you all to watch the bidders video, which has even more information, and to look at those materials. And I think at this point, we can open it up if there are any additional questions, or Aram, if there's something else you wanted to hop on with.
Yeah, I think we're happy to answer any questions, to highlight things you may be looking for if you're interested in applying. The TA handbook, again, will really help you with the eSNAPs part of the situation and things you have to do for HUD directly. We used to have a much longer handbook, but HUD has actually put out a lot of guidance in the past years. And so the handbook, sometimes it's like the handbook tells you to go somewhere else. But the place it is telling you to go somewhere else will often be like, here's step-by-step with screenshots how to get through something. So eSNAPs is basically like an online application system. It's just finicky and kind of old and slow. And so sometimes it takes a minute to get through. The questions themselves won't be like generally shocking to you. It's just every now and again, you may need a reference point for like these forms you have to submit, or a number you have to get from the government. So the other place is the bidders material. So in the bidders folder that was linked before, if I find it, I can link it again, or Katie, I don't know if you have it, but the bidders folder, the EveryOne home website, has the materials to apply. And so what we have is a box folder. It's an online folder, but it'll show the recording. It'll give the slideshow from there. But what it will do is it has a required documents and applications document in it. And so it'll tell you like the couple things that you're going to have to, do. So you have kind of a checklist there. So I know it was a lot of information today, but happy to answer questions from folks, or we'll look out for your emails.
Looks like Everett's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to, and I apologize, I was actually doing 2 or 3 different things while the meeting was going, so I apologize if I missed it. The one slide that you were talking about, Esther, as far as the additional, sounded like payments for sort of hard to fill positions, the navigators, psychotherapists, et cetera, can you or someone cover that just again? I apologize, because that was of some interest.
Essentially, so if you're going to apply for a grant to do one of the housing things, like you want to do permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, then you are allowed to additionally apply for supportive services. There's a wide variety of things you can do with them. But if you don't on staff have some of these positions readily available, then you could use this funding source to contract. Essentially, that's what it is. It's to contract with somebody else who could provide this. So, and it just says you could do it full-time, you could do it part-time, you could do it by contract, and you could use it in like usually you're going to probably fund your own positions in-house, like case managers, but these other positions you'd be allowed to use those dollars for to hire from like an outside organization or somebody private. Does that
So
make
what-
sense?
No, absolutely. It's just sort of the justification. So as an example, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure others are having these struggles as well. So we utilize licensed clinical social workers to do, sort of our psychotherapy interventions with our residents, et cetera. Or at least an initial sort of intervention. And if it needs to be raised from there, then we do that. But so that particular profession is pretty scarce as far as finding, folks to work in the supportive housing space. Certainly at medical centers, not as challenging, but again, supportive housing, definitely so. And so if we've got existing projects that we are either collaborating or partnering with and or leading out, meaning existing. So is the funding available as because it's not like you're renewing a project, because the project is actually active and already going, but you get my point. So is the NOFO process at that point where if we've been struggling with these particular resources and we have a need for them, or the clients have a need for them, is this the appropriate pathway for that?
So you raised a couple things. The thing with if you have anybody existing that you're already using, in order to pay for them with this money, you'd really have to tie that they're only serving the people eligible for this essentially new housing project you're applying for. So to pay for like a licensed therapist, you'd have to tie, like say you had them seeing 10 people and 6 of them were from this existing program. Well, only the part by seeing 4 of them, you could bill directly to this, but you wouldn't seek this funding to fill something like that. You'd seek this funding as like, I want to do a new housing project, but I know they're going to need help. And then that's where you'd be bringing in the supportive services piece. Certainly you could leverage it to kind of help both in some ways. If you're trying to pay for a full-time position, you only have funding for part of it. You could be creative like that, but just knowing at the end of the day, their work that you're going to bill to this program can only be billed for those clients that are like the literally homeless that come through coordinated entry.
Right. Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. So we have, just with the whole CalAIM, ECM, and ILOS, providers sort of becoming or sort of surfacing more, and we're one of them. And we have several projects that are actually reaching their final stages. They're going into lease up. And so those projects are already, quote, approved from previous NOFOs, obviously. And then this is just one component. So trying to parse it, meaning the project itself was approved, let's say maybe 2 NOFOs ago or something like that. And now just looking at the landscape with what the actual property management company is asking for and what the contract's asking for. Certainly we do have, like I say, resources on board, just not enough to either fulfill maybe, let's say, the requested contracted proportion or just not existing. So kind of, again, sort of a weird, I guess, question in that the project exists, the staffing didn't, and sort of, trying to navigate. So does that sound still like that this might be a pathway for that?
The existing project is a new housing project?
It's new from the perspective that, yeah, it hasn't been leased up yet. We're in that.
Okay.
I'm going to jump in here because I think at this point, probably it might be best for Homebase to schedule some time with Everett.
That's fine.
It does seem like it's a pretty detailed question, and want to use this time wisely with everyone else in terms of some generic questions. So I apologize for interrupting, but I do want to make sure that if there are some generic questions that anyone else has, that there's an opportunity for that to happen.
So ever reach out. The one thing I will say to make it general, Chelsea, thank you though. We were getting in our own chat. But the one thing I will say is you can like use this money and be leveraging like other housing money. So it's like if you have a project that you haven't leased up and there's no money being spent, like HUD doesn't want you to come in and use this money for something you're already spending money on. It's a plantation. They don't want you to do that. But if you haven't leased up and the money hasn't been spent, this is common for places to say, you know what, we can actually lock in the COC funding for a portion of this, and then we can use this other housing for a portion, and then we can get supportive services dollars within that. So you can do some interesting kind of braided things, but I think to Chelsea's point, it's probably complex enough to take it offline. So email us if you want to talk further, but good question, Everett.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that.
All right. Oh, good. Jordan, I see your hand is up.
Hi. So I think something is more specific, so I'm going to hold off and see if I can reach out with home-based folks on that. I just wanted to ask your opinion. You know, we would be a new project and an organization that would have to go through the process of getting a DUNS number and the SAM registration with the federal government. Given that and the due date of October 8th, do you still feel like this is something that we should apply? In other words, do you think at this point, given where we're at with the national application, it would be sort of prohibitive, or thoughts on that in terms of timeline?
I'd probably see if you could go on like today and get like the number.
Yeah.
And see, like, it's hard for me to say how fast they're being responsive to approving those requests, but I don't think they want that to be a barrier. I would just do that piece sooner than later. And in the meantime, I'm happy to kind of reach out to my organization-wide colleagues to see if anybody has a better sense of how long that's taking. And then maybe you could reach out to us and we could talk a little further.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Jordan, let me just say, you can get a DUNS number, usually takes up to 30 days, but for an extra fee, and I think it's a little over $200, you can get it within 5 days. So they do have an expedited process.
That's great. I think I did see that. I think I was actually more worried about the other, I think the SAM, which they said could take up to 10
Right.
days. So given where we're at, but thank you for that. We'll look into that too.
Sure.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all so much for joining us. We will continue to put information on our website. We ask that you consider looking at the Bidders Conference materials. Definitely take advantage of the support that's being provided by Homebase and schedule some additional time. My sentiment is that our county is looking for innovative projects. We really want to infuse dollars in our system in ways that it has not been in the past. So if you are a provider, you have an idea, take an opportunity to fully vet out if this is the time, but even if not, take the time to learn what this process is so that you can prepare yourself for the next round. And so we look forward to engaging with you all. Thank you on behalf of EveryOne Home and on our leadership board for all the good work that you're doing as well. And we ask everyone to stay safe. Thank you.